My brother called me a loser at his promotion party until his CO saluted me. What happened next left him speechless. The hall was filled with chatter, sharp suits, polite clinks of glasses, and a spotlight shining a little too brightly on the man of the hour, my older brother, Darren. He stood at the center of it all, beaming like he had built the company himself. The backdrop behind him bore the logo of Sinclair Enterprises, his employer, and tonight's host. Gold lettering across the wall read, "Congratulations, Darren, Regional Director." His voice carried across the floor, loud and proud as he addressed the crowd of coworkers, clients, and senior execs who'd gathered to honor his climb up the ladder. I had arrived late, on purpose. Darren hadn't exactly begged me to come. He'd sent a half-hearted invitation days earlier, the kind you send someone out of obligation. I accepted not out of love, but strategy. I wasn't there for family. I was there because I needed to be seen, quietly, on my terms. When Darren finally noticed me leaning near the back wall, dressed in plain dark slacks and a muted button-up, he raised his voice and pointed with that smug, condescending grin he wore too well. "That's my brother, Nate," he called out loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Still figuring life out, aren't you?" His tone dripped with amusement, not warmth. Laughter followed from the few sitting nearby, polite, fake, and exactly what he wanted. Attention on him, and a quick jab to keep me small. I didn't respond, not even a smile, because tonight wasn't his victory lap. Not really. It was a setup he didn't see coming, and I wasn't here to defend myself. While he played the crowd, I scanned the room quietly. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. Another message from someone inside Sinclair. Their top exec had been trying to reach me for over 2 weeks, and tonight, by design, I gave them the chance. They didn't know I'd show up, but I knew they would be here. The whole upper tier of Sinclair's board had flown in, and unlike Darren, they weren't interested in office gossip or family jabs. They were after something else. Answers. Sinclair had a supply chain problem, one they couldn't publicly talk about. 3 weeks ago, my company, Blackridge Technologies, acquired Hensley Analytics, a data firm Sinclair relied on for its logistics optimization. Their software ran the models that kept Sinclair's fleet on schedule and their forecasts precise. Without it, they'd be scrambling. And for the past 2 weeks, they'd been scrambling. Because after our acquisition, we paused Hensley's licensing renewals. We didn't shut anything down. We just waited. We knew they'd come knocking. And tonight, they didn't have to knock. I walked through the door myself. The moment it happened was subtle, but sharp. Across the room, mid-conversation with one of his board members, Sinclair's CEO, Jonathan Vance, froze. His eyes flicked past Darren, past the others, and landed straight on me. There was a brief pause in his speech, the kind people don't notice unless they're watching closely. Then, glass in hand, he stepped away from the circle without apology and moved across the floor with focused purpose. "You're the man behind Blackridge?" he said as he reached me, his voice clear, his expression changed. "I've been trying to get a meeting with you for weeks. It's an honor. What you pulled off with Hensley, genius work." The words didn't echo. They slammed the room into silence. People turned. Conversations froze. Darren's laughter dried mid-breath. The CEO turned to him, only half glancing. "You didn't tell me he was your brother." Darren blinked. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. His grip tightened on the side of the podium, like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He didn't speak. Not a defense, not a follow-up, nothing. Around us, the atmosphere shifted. The same colleagues who laughed minutes ago now whispered with raised brows. Some were already pulling out their phones. Others just stared, their opinions changing in real time. And in that moment, without raising my voice, without defending a single thing about my life, I became the most important person in the room. Darren didn't move. He stood by the podium like his body had locked up, unable to make sense of what had just unfolded in front of him. The man who ran his company, the one he'd been trying to impress for years, had just left a conversation mid-sentence to greet the aimless brother he'd just humiliated. The silence didn't last long, though. It never does in rooms full of executives and climbers. Whispers replaced it, low but sharp, as if each word might cut the air thinner. Jonathan Vance didn't wait for a response. His attention returned to me, hand already reaching for mine in a firm shake, his voice steady. "We've been reviewing everything you did with Blackridge after the acquisition. Brilliant positioning. Your restructuring of Hensley Systems. No one in our entire strategy division thought of it. Your algorithms took 4 weeks to beat our quarter-long forecast models." I nodded once. There wasn't any reason to look surprised. I had expected this. What I didn't expect was how quickly the rest of the room began to orbit us. Senior managers from Darren's division approached cautiously, their interest now unmistakable. They weren't here for Darren anymore. They were curious about me, quiet Nate, the brother who wasn't even supposed to be in this conversation. Darren still hadn't said anything. His fiancée, Lauren, hovered beside him awkwardly, clearly torn between trying to salvage his image and her own curiosity about what had just derailed the night. She glanced over at me, eyebrows pinched, probably trying to recall if I'd ever mentioned what I did for a living. I hadn't. No one in my family really asked. I turned slightly and addressed Jonathan directly. "I've been meaning to reach back, but timing was important. The delays in the Hensley renewals weren't accidental. We were watching Sinclair's response to the disruption. And we noticed," he replied, almost laughing, though it wasn't a joke. "We had teams working around the clock trying to replicate what your system used to automate. We failed every time. You've boxed us in efficiently." "Not boxed in," I corrected, calm but firm. "Aligned. You're sitting on valuable logistics data, but your infrastructure is 20 months outdated. You needed a new backbone. We built one." Now he did laugh. Not in mockery. This time it was admiration. "I want to talk more. Not next week. Not over email. You free tonight? After this?" I nodded again, and that was enough for him. He clapped a hand on my shoulder once, then turned to his assistant standing nearby, a younger man who looked like he'd just seen the floor tilt under his feet. "Move my morning meeting. I want to block off time with Mr. King." Then he turned and walked away, signaling something to another board member across the room. The message spread faster than a press release. For the first time that night, Darren moved. Not toward me, though. He stepped back, trying to reorient the spotlight he'd built. His voice rose, trying to salvage control. "Let's not lose focus here. This night is still about the team, about our journey, our accomplishments." But no one was listening. His coworkers, once locked onto every word he spoke, were now either drifting toward me or checking their phones. Several were already looking up Blackridge Technologies, piecing together a narrative he'd never imagined. The DJ, confused by the shift in tone, faded the music slightly, unsure if the party was still supposed to be in full swing. The event coordinator adjusted the lighting, almost like the atmosphere had to reset. A man in a slate gray suit, mid-40s, regional VP of finance, if I remembered correctly, approached. "Mr. King, I had no idea you were behind Blackridge. We've been studying your system architecture all month." I didn't flinch at the title. "Just Nate," I said, shaking his hand. "I'd love a minute of your time. We've been tasked with finding scalable partners, but no one's solved the bottlenecks like your model has." I offered him a short nod. "I'll be here for a bit. Let's talk later." As he stepped away, Darren finally approached, expression strained. "Nate," he said, forcing a grin that looked like it hurt his jaw. "I didn't know you were involved in all that. You never said anything." "I wasn't asked," I replied evenly. His laugh was thin. "Come on, man. I didn't mean anything earlier. Just joking around. You know how these things go. You always keep things close to the chest." "You didn't invite me to celebrate," I said, voice calm. "You invited me to parade. And you didn't joke. You made a point to show people where you thought I stood." He tried again. "Look, we've all underestimated people before. You caught everyone off guard." I let the words hang. I didn't need to reply. He was trying to reframe the situation like it was a shared misunderstanding. But it wasn't. He had built an image of himself by contrasting it against a version of me he'd never bothered to learn about. And now that narrative was collapsing. Lauren stepped up beside him. Nate, we've always been proud of you. We just didn't know how far you'd come. I looked at her, not unkindly, but without giving anything away. You didn't ask. She hesitated, then fell quiet. Behind them, the crowd had fully shifted. Darren's boss, a woman named Marissa Cole, came up next. You built Blackridge's platform? I met her eyes. Designed it. Scaled it. Still improving it. She didn't blink. Are you open to discussing integrations? Possibly, I said. Depends on the terms. Marissa nodded and handed me a card. I'll have my assistant schedule something. This week. That was the moment Darren broke. It wasn't loud, and it didn't come with any dramatic outburst. He simply turned away, jaw set, and walked back to the stage where his plaque still sat on a little stand. He didn't look at it, just picked it up slowly, like it had suddenly become heavier than it used to be. He stood there, shoulders slightly slumped, pretending to check his phone, but I could see it. He was unraveling. I didn't follow. I stayed where I was, because the story had already rewritten itself. And the people in that room, the ones who'd once echoed his mockery, now hung on my next move. Jonathan returned 20 minutes later, after a quiet conversation in the back corner with several board members. You've turned our structure upside down, he said without preamble. In a good way. I'd like to talk acquisition. Of Blackridge? I asked. He shook his head. Of a partnership. Full access to your infrastructure for our North American operations. Long term. I folded my arms. You'll need to revisit your executive models. Sinclair still runs old guard systems. Your board won't like the changes I'll suggest. He didn't miss a beat. We're overdue for disruption. You'd be surprised how many of us are ready for that conversation. Behind him, someone else was trying to make eye contact with me, another regional manager. I glanced past them, toward Darren. He hadn't left the party, but he might as well have. He was stuck in a loop now, reliving what went wrong, probably rewinding every word he'd said into that microphone. Jonathan leaned in slightly. You said earlier you were watching Sinclair's response. What did you see? I looked at him, steady. A lot of surface-level reaction. Not enough adaptation. But that can be fixed. He smiled. Then let's talk. Not just about fixes, but the future. I nodded once. Tonight? Right after this. The deal wasn't sealed yet, but it was circling. And while Darren stood in the corner with a plaque that no longer mattered, I was drawing up the lines that would reshape the company he thought he owned a piece of. The rest of the night moved quickly. People I'd never spoken to before now wanted private conversations, consultations, advice on digital pivots. My answers were short, not dismissive, just measured. Every word now held weight. Darren didn't interrupt. He hovered in the background, a shadow of the man who had started the evening glowing under the spotlight. When I finally walked toward the exit, Jonathan at my side, people parted like they didn't want to miss anything. No music played now. No speeches were given. Just a quiet understanding that something irreversible had taken place. Outside, the air was cooler than I expected. My car, parked 2 blocks away, sat beneath the yellow glow of a street lamp. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me worth re-examining. Darren had called me a loser, laughed in front of strangers. And for a few minutes, the room believed him. Then the man he wanted approval from walked straight past him and shook my hand. The conversation with Jonathan would continue. So would the restructuring. Sinclair's future was already bending around the presence of someone they hadn't accounted for. The meeting happened that same night, not in a boardroom, but in a private lounge 4 floors above the event hall, behind soundproof glass and guarded by 2 men who didn't bother asking questions. Jonathan Vance was already there when I walked in, seated at a long table with a tablet open in front of him, blueprints and market forecasts pulled up. No suites, no crowd, just business. The kind that didn't need applause to matter. He gestured toward the chair across from him. We'll skip the small talk. What's your number? I sat, leaned forward slightly. For partnership access to Blackridge systems? 2-year minimum, multi-platform access, executive-level compliance, and I have oversight on integration, full sign-off authority. 1.7 upfront. Scaled equity every quarter. He didn't blink. And if we offer direct acquisition instead? Not interested.
Why?
Because I don't sell the structure. I evolve it. Blackridge isn't just a product. It's a foundation. You don't buy the foundation. You build on it. He nodded once. Fair. And the oversight? My team leads all deployment. I choose who stays. Anyone in your company who slows us down is removed. Clean. He studied me carefully. Even your brother? I didn't hesitate, especially him. The pause between us wasn't heavy. It was confirming. He knew this wasn't personal revenge. It was organizational precision. Sinclair wanted its future secured. I was the key. And nothing sentimental would be allowed to dull the edge. I've already spoken with 3 board members, he continued. They're in. We need 1 more to finalize. I'll handle that tomorrow. You won't need to, I replied. The 4th member is already on board. Jonathan leaned back. Who? Michelle Tran. I had coffee with her last week in Chicago. She saw the roadmap before you did. He laughed once under his breath. Not mocking, just realizing how far ahead the game had been played without him knowing. You're efficient. No, I'm prepared. The conversation turned to operational timelines, licensing bridges, data migration, regional pilot programs. I answered each question with clear parameters, no vague promises, no delay tactics. When he stood, so did I. He extended his hand once more. I'll have the first draft in your inbox by morning. I'll have revisions back by noon. He didn't speak again, he just nodded and I walked out. The building was quieter now. The promotion party had ended. Lights dimmed. Music shut off. And Darren was gone. My phone buzzed once as I entered the elevator. A message from him. Just a sentence. Can we talk? I didn't respond. Not out of pride, but because there was nothing left to discuss. The next morning arrived fast. By 6, my team was looped in. We began preparing the launch structure. Blackridge's servers were already scaling to accommodate Sinclair's systems. Meetings were lined up. Contracts reviewed. The industry headlines would hit in 48 hours. Sinclair Enterprises announces strategic data integration through Blackridge Technologies. It wouldn't mention Darren, but everyone who knew, knew. By Friday, the contract was signed. Jonathan sent a personal note congratulating us both. You reshaped our architecture in one night, he wrote. This is only the beginning. It was. The following week, I stepped into Sinclair's headquarters, not as a guest, not as a relative, but as the architect of their next-generation logistics framework. I was introduced to department heads as the strategic partner whose system had made their previous models obsolete. Nobody brought up the party. Nobody asked about Darren. He wasn't there. I found out later he'd taken a leave of absence, citing personal matters. Internally, he was being reviewed. His team had mismanaged a licensing lapse, leading to avoidable downtime. A quiet investigation was underway. Not for anything illegal, just for negligence. Carelessness. I didn't request it. I didn't even suggest it. But the system doesn't wait for personal reconciliation. It corrects inefficiencies. A month later, he reached out again, this time by phone. I let it ring twice before picking up. Hey, he said, I don't know how to start this. Then don't start with apologies, I said. There was a pause. You embarrassed me.
No, irraplia.
You did that to yourself. He sighed. I spent years climbing, following rules, playing politics, and you just walked in and... No, I didn't walk in. I built something. While you chased recognition, I chased solutions. We're not the same. I know that now. Good. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just final. I'm stepping down, he said quietly. I talked to HR. It's done. That's your choice. I want to figure things out, he added. Not for work. For myself. Maybe take a break. Maybe build something real. I didn't answer. He was expecting encouragement. I wasn't in the business of offering validation anymore. Anyway, he added, I just wanted to say, I see things different now. I hope so. And that was it. He hung up. I didn't save the number. Over the next 6 months, Blackridge expanded. Our systems became standard inside Sinclair's global logistics chain. We bypassed old habits, rewrote playbooks, optimized routes, collapsed costs. The board voted to retain us permanently. We weren't contractors anymore. We were infrastructure. Darren never returned. Last I heard, he moved out of the city, doing something unrelated. Maybe coaching, maybe consulting. It didn't matter. The spotlight he'd fought for had passed, and the brother he mocked had taken the stage not with applause, but with control.